I saw the notification just as I placed the last cardboard box into the trunk of my car. My phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my leg with a sharp, insistent rhythm. I pulled it out and saw a social media alert. My son David had just posted a new photo. It was a picture of my back taken merely seconds ago as I walked down the driveway of the house I had owned and maintained for over 30 years. His caption was short and brutal. It read, "The Parasite is officially gone." Right below it, barely a minute after it went live, his wife Sarah added her own comment. "The house already feels cleaner without her." I stood there in the crisp autumn air, resting my hand against the cold metal of my car. I did not cry. At 62, I had shed enough tears in my life, mostly in the quiet months after my husband passed away. I simply stared at the illuminated screen, watching a few scattered likes appear from Sarah's extended circle of friends. David had not even waited for me to start the engine before broadcasting his perceived victory to the world. He honestly thought he had won. He genuinely believed that by treating me like an unwanted burden in my own home, he had successfully driven me away so he and his wife could claim the space entirely for themselves. They had spent the last 8 months slowly pushing me into the corners of my own life. They assumed I was too old, too tired, or perhaps too desperate for their presence to ever push back. I closed the application, turned off the screen, and slid the phone back into my coat pocket. I did not type a furious reply. I did not march back through the front door to demand an explanation or an apology. Words were a completely useless currency in that household, and I had stopped spending them a long time ago. I shut the trunk with a firm, satisfying click, walked around to the driver's seat, and slid behind the wheel. Glancing at the living room window, I could see the faint, flickering blue glow of the television screen. They were already relaxing, already celebrating their newfound freedom. But as I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the familiar curb, a quiet, genuine smile touched my lips. They thought I was walking away, defeated, leaving them to enjoy a fully funded, comfortable life. They had absolutely no idea what was sitting on the kitchen counter or what was going to happen when the clock struck midnight. To understand how we reached the point of public humiliation, you have to look back to a rainy Tuesday 8 months earlier. David and Sarah had shown up at my door with sad expressions and a rehearsed speech. Their apartment rent had been raised, they were trying to save for a down payment on a place of their own, and they were drowning in everyday expenses. David, looking at his shoes, had asked if they could stay in my spare bedrooms for just a little while. As a mother, my instinct was to open my doors. I told them they were welcome, expecting a temporary arrangement built on mutual respect and shared responsibilities. The first 2 weeks were perfectly fine. Sarah cooked dinner a few times and David mowed the lawn. But the subtle shift happened quickly. It started in the kitchen. I came downstairs one morning to find my favorite cast-iron skillet, the one I had seasoned and cared for over 2 decades, tossed into the bottom of the donation bin. Sarah stood by the stove, unboxing a set of cheap, brightly colored non-stick pans. When I calmly retrieved my skillet, she rolled her eyes and muttered that she was just trying to modernize this ancient house. David completely ignored the interaction, keeping his eyes glued to his phone while drinking the coffee I had purchased. I didn't start a screaming match. I simply washed my pan, dried it, and stored it in the cabinet. But the boundary lines were being drawn. Within a month, my decorative pillows were replaced. The thermostat was constantly lowered to a freezing temperature because Sarah liked it that way. My television time in the living room was interrupted by them simply changing the channel without asking. Whenever I brought up these small disrespects, David would sigh heavily. He would ask me to please be reasonable, claiming Sarah was just nesting and trying to feel comfortable. I realized very quickly that they did not see themselves as guests in my home. They saw themselves as the new owners, and they viewed me as an outdated fixture that came with the property. I watched them closely, keeping my expression neutral, mapping out exactly how their minds worked. If they wanted to play a game of control, I was entirely willing to participate, but I would not be playing by their rules. The disrespect soon evolved from rearranging my furniture to attempting to redefine my role in the household. Sarah started leaving her laundry baskets in the hallway right outside my bedroom door. The first time it happened, I assumed it was an oversight. By the third time, it was accompanied by a sticky note that read, "Please use the delicate cycle for the blouses." She was treating me like a live-in maid who was lucky to have chores. I did not confront her. I simply picked up her laundry basket and placed it directly inside David's home office, right on top of his expensive gaming keyboard. The next morning, Sarah stormed into the kitchen, her face flushed with irritation. She loudly complained that she had nothing clean to wear to her office. I took a slow sip of my morning tea, looked her directly in the eye, and smiled. I told her the washing machine operated exactly the same way it had yesterday, and she was free to read the manual if she had forgotten the buttons. David rushed into the kitchen trying to run interference. He told me I had plenty of free time and that helping out wouldn't kill me. I set my mug down, gently. I reminded him that my free time belonged to me, not to their chores. From that day forward, I installed a solid brass lock on my master bedroom door. I moved my personal laundry hampers, my expensive bath products, and my favorite books behind that locked door. They began acting as though my very existence was a severe inconvenience. If I walked into the living room to read, they would groan loudly and retreat to their bedrooms, slamming the door. They whispered when I walked past, making sure I could hear the tone, if not the words. They wanted me to feel utterly isolated, hoping the discomfort would break my spirit. They wanted me to shrink away and apologize for taking up oxygen in my own house. Instead, I simply observed their tactics. I realized they were entirely dependent on my space, yet completely ungrateful for it. It was time to look closely at the invisible strings holding this arrangement together, starting with the numbers. One rainy afternoon, while they were both out at work, I sat at my dining room table and opened my laptop. I pulled up my banking statements for the past 6 months and began highlighting every expense. The numbers told a story of quiet, persistent theft. My monthly grocery bill had tripled. I was paying for Sarah's premium organic meal kits, David's expensive imported beers, and specialty snacks I never touched. The water bill had doubled due to Sarah's hour-long showers, and the electricity bill was staggering because they left every light burning and ran the air conditioning all day for their dog. I looked at the shared family streaming accounts. I looked at the premium internet package I had upgraded solely because David complained about his gaming lag. I realized I was fully funding the lifestyle of 2 working adults who treated me like a disease. They weren't saving for a down payment on a new house. They were simply living far beyond their means on my dime. I did not yell. I did not print the spreadsheets and throw them on the kitchen island. Instead, I opened a new browser tab. I logged into my primary bank and opened a completely separate checking account. Over the next hour, I systematically rerouted my pension, my investments, and my savings into the new, secure account. I left exactly $20 in the old joint account that David still had a debit card for, a remnant from when I used to send him on grocery runs. The next evening, I stopped buying their groceries. I went to the market and purchased exactly what I needed for myself: a small piece of salmon, some fresh vegetables, and my preferred brand of coffee. I stored my items in a small, lockable mini fridge I had quietly moved into my bedroom. When David came down for dinner and opened the main refrigerator, he stared at the empty shelves in total confusion. He asked where the food was. I didn't look up from my book. I calmly informed him that the supermarket was open until 9 and he better take his own wallet. The financial tap was officially shut off. The lack of free food and unrestricted spending created a thick, suffocating tension in the house. The climax of their entitlement occurred 2 weeks later during a Sunday evening. Sarah had invited her parents over for a casual dinner. She had ordered expensive takeout, conveniently forgetting to offer me any. I didn't mind. I had already eaten my own meal in my room. I came downstairs to grab a glass of water, intending to return upstairs and leave them to their evening. As I filled my glass at the sink, Sarah's mother loudly complimented the layout of the living room. Sarah laughed a sharp, artificial sound and said, "Thanks. We're planning to knock down this kitchen wall next month to open it up. It'll look so much better once we get rid of the outdated cabinets." I turned off the faucet. The water stopped running and the kitchen went completely silent. I walked over to the edge of the dining area holding my glass. I looked directly at Sarah. I kept my voice perfectly level, devoid of any anger or heat. I stated that no walls would be coming down and no cabinets would be replaced because this was my house and no renovations had been authorized. Sarah's face turned bright red. She looked at David, expecting him to defend her. David stood up, running a hand through his hair, looking embarrassed in front of his in-laws. He told me I was embarrassing them and acting incredibly selfish. He claimed I was hoarding space I didn't even use and stifling their future. I looked at my son, truly seeing him for the first time in years. He was not a victim of circumstance. He was an active participant in my disrespect. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my right to own my own home. I simply nodded, slowly took my glass of water and walked back up the stairs. I closed my bedroom door and engaged the brass lock. As I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the muffled, angry whispers from downstairs, I made my final decision. They wanted the house to themselves. They felt entirely entitled to the walls, the roof, and the space. I decided right then that I would give them exactly what they wanted, but it would not look anything like they expected. The next morning, I woke up early, dressed neatly, and drove to a completely different part of town. I met with a leasing agent at a beautiful modern apartment complex tailored for active adults. It had massive windows, a quiet courtyard, and absolutely zero maintenance requirements. I toured a 2-bedroom unit on the ground floor. It was peaceful, spotless, and entirely mine. I signed the lease, immediately paying the deposit, and the first month's rent using the funds safely tucked away in my new private account. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing in total silence. I did not mention the apartment. I did not argue with David or Sarah. When they left their dishes in the sink, I ignored them. When they complained about the Wi-Fi being slow, I smiled and continued reading my book. My lack of reaction seemed to frustrate them even more. They thought they had broken me into submission. In reality, I was simply too busy executing my exit strategy to care about their petty games. Every day, while they were at their respective offices, I packed. I didn't pack large, obvious boxes at first. I started with the sentimental items. I packed photo albums, my jewelry, my favorite winter coats, and the small decorations that made the house feel like mine. I loaded them into the trunk of my car and drove them to my new apartment, slowly building my new sanctuary. Then came the administrative work. I called the electric company, the water department, and the gas provider. I did not transfer the services. I requested total cancellations, effective on the last day of the month. I called the internet provider and did the same. Finally, I made a call to a local auto transport service. The second car sitting in the driveway, the pristine sedan David drove to work every single day, was legally registered exclusively in my name. I arranged for a tow truck to quietly pick it up using my spare key on the exact morning of my departure. Every piece of the puzzle was sliding perfectly into place, entirely out of their sight. That brings us to moving day. It was a Saturday, the last day of the month. I had rented a small cargo van the night before, parking it discreetly down the street. When I woke up, I began moving the final obvious boxes out of my bedroom. I carried them right through the living room. David and Sarah were sprawled out on the couch watching a morning talk show. They didn't pause the television. They didn't ask if I needed help with the heavy boxes. They simply watched me sweat, exchanging smug, satisfied glances. They thought I was retreating to a tiny, miserable room somewhere driven out by their superior endurance. I made trip after trip, loading my clothes, my remaining books, and my coffee machine. On my final pass through the kitchen, I pulled a plain white envelope from my purse. I placed it perfectly in the center of the kitchen island, right next to the fruit bowl. Inside the envelope was a single set of house keys and a short, handwritten note. As I walked out the front door, carrying the very last cardboard box, I heard the faint click of a smartphone camera. I didn't turn around, but I knew exactly what David was doing. He was capturing the moment of his triumph. He was taking the photograph that he would immediately post online with the caption about the parasite leaving. I walked down the driveway, the autumn leaves crunching under my boots. I loaded the box into the trunk of my car, ignoring the phone buzzing in my pocket as the social media notifications began to roll in. I got into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors, and drove away without looking back at the house. I drove directly to my new sunlit apartment. I unpacked my coffee maker, brewed a fresh cup, and sat on my new patio. I watched the birds in the courtyard, feeling a massive, suffocating weight lift off my shoulders. I was finally free, and the countdown had officially begun. My first evening in the new apartment was glorious. I ordered a pizza, something I hadn't done in months, and ate it while watching a movie at a volume that pleased me. There was no heavy footsteps upstairs, no passive-aggressive sighing, no one adjusting the thermostat. It was pure, unadulterated peace. As the evening wore on, I kept a casual eye on the clock. 11:30 p.m. 11:45 p.m. 11:55 p.m. I imagined the scene back at the old house. It was a Saturday night. David and Sarah were likely staying up late streaming a movie on the high-speed internet I used to pay for, basking in the glow of the central heating I used to fund. At exactly midnight, the scheduled cancellations executed through the automated systems of the utility companies. In my mind's eye, I could see it happen. The Wi-Fi router in the living room suddenly blinked red before dying completely. The movie on their screen froze, buffering endlessly into a black screen. A few minutes later, the lights flickered and went out as the electric company terminated the service connection. The furnace, deprived of both gas and electricity, slowly spun down into total silence. The house, their supposed prize, went completely dark and immediately began to chill in the crisp autumn weather. And if they happened to look out the front window into the driveway, they would notice something else missing. The spare car David relied on was gone, picked up by the transport company hours earlier, while he was entirely focused on watching me pack. I took a final sip of my herbal tea, washed the mug in my functioning sink, and turned off my bedside lamp. I slid under the warm, heavy blankets of my bed and closed my eyes. I slept better that night than I had in nearly a year, undisturbed by anything except the pleasant, quiet hum of my new refrigerator. The trap hadn't been set with lawyers or complex legal maneuvers. It had been set with simple, undeniable reality. The free ride was over. I woke up naturally at 8, made a cup of coffee, and finally checked my phone. The screen instantly lit up with 18 missed calls from David, 7 from Sarah, and a frantic string of text messages. The panic had clearly escalated throughout the night. 12:15 a.m. Mom, the internet is out. Did you change the password? 12:30 a.m. The power is out now. What did you do to the breaker? 6 a.m. Mom, wake up. My car is gone. Call me right now. Then came the final message, sent just minutes before I woke up. The arrogance from his social media post was completely gone, replaced by sudden desperation. Mom, please, give us one chance. It's freezing here. Sarah is crying. We don't have the money for deposits to turn the power back on, and I can't get to work without the car. Please answer. I did not reply. I just pictured the white envelope I had left on the kitchen island. Inside were my house keys and a simple factual note. The house is yours to manage. The utility accounts are closed, and I have taken my car. You wanted independence, and now you have it. Do not contact me for money. Without my wallet and my patience, their comfortable reality had collapsed in mere hours. I set the phone face down on the table, picked up my novel, and enjoyed my quiet morning. I never replied to that text. I blocked Sarah's number and profiles entirely, and I put David on silent. I refused to let their sudden emergency become my problem. Through mutual friends, I heard about the aftermath. David had to take out a high-interest payday loan just to cover the utility deposits and get the lights turned back on. He rode the city bus for a month until he could afford a cheap, unreliable used car. Sarah's grand remodeling plans vanished the second they realized what basic property taxes and maintenance actually cost. They were barely scraping by in the house they had fought so hard to take over. As for me, Catherine, I thrived. I decorated my apartment with bright rugs Sarah would have hated and left my favorite cast iron skillet permanently resting on the stove. I joined a local book club and walked the quiet courtyard every evening without anyone rolling their eyes at my presence. David had called me a parasite, but a parasite drains its host until there is nothing left. By walking out with that final box, I hadn't just changed my address. I had severed the actual parasites from their lifeblood. I didn't need to yell, argue, or demand respect. I simply packed my bags, walked away, and finally let them pay their own bills.